Connor, back in the tank.
Let's do it.
Yeah, we're going to dive deep into one of, I would say, the most popular reasons people get into tech sales, which is this idea of making $300,000 plus a year. We want to talk about why a lot of people don't get there. I know we were talking before we started recording. Realistically, if you take into account everyone who's ever had an SDR job and tries to break into this career, I would say, less than 20% actually even get into a position where making 300K is a possibility.
Yep.
At the same time, content like this, we are absolutely here as proponents of the tech sales career path, but we've always been realistic, and we've always told people that approaching this with a longer term mindset is the way to go. This isn't a cash grab really quick, escape the matrix play. But Connor, I'd be curious, maybe setting the stage for the episode where your head is at, what you want to talk about, and quite frankly, give people that you don't see on all the you can make 300K a year types of videos.
No, I think you set the table well. I think a lot of people, when they're first breaking into the career, they see a thumbnail on a video with 300K. It looks easy. It takes 5 years to get there or so. And it's easy to say that out loud. But then when you're actually living it, 5 years is a long time. There's going to be ebbs and flows. There's going to be stressful situations, stressful deals. You'll be behind your number for a quarter. A lot of people, there's a certain personality type you have to be successful and stay motivated in a sales career long term. And a lot of people realize they're just used to receiving work, completing the tasks, getting a passing grade, and then waiting for their next work. And sales is just not like that at all. So I think the career path itself throws a lot of people off once they get into it. And another thing I compare it to, it's easy to do, but hard to do at the same time. There is a playbook to getting there, but I almost compare it to working out. If you want to get in better shape, it's easy. The playbook's out there. You got to eat right, eat less than you consume, etc., whatever your goals are, but actually doing it on a day-by-day basis is hard when you're not feeling great. So it's kind of like that in sales as well. And yeah, we'll be getting into a lot more detail.
Totally. And I think as a starting point, one, we can address if that's totally possible, and also the path to get there, if so. Maybe just setting the stage. I think, to your point, I love the analogy you gave of there are a lot of things you can do to put yourself in the right position, but there's that 10 to 20% that, call it at the simplest level, is luck and timing. Yeah. And you can be killing it. You can be doing tons of things great. At the individual level, you've got to manage the politics of being in that career to get to that position, the company you're at, the managers you deal with, all of those things. And then at the macro level, whether it's the economy, the company you're at decides to do layoffs, even though you're otherwise doing well, there's lots of things that are inside and outside of your control. Maybe I'd hand it over to you in terms of if making 300K is possible, and if you were maybe starting over today, how would you even think about getting there with what you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible and people are doing it. But from what I saw during my time, even as an SDR manager, about people who enter as an SDR within 1 to 2 years, about 50% have dropped off and oftentimes moved to a different career entirely, whether it's consulting or just something entirely different. So I think, one, I would start by almost reverse engineering what it's going to take to get there. So just take a look at your company. Who's making that in terms of OTE? What type of role are they in, and how many promotions is it going to take to get there? Is it going to take an SMB promotion to SMB AE, then to mid-market, then to enterprise? Is there level 1s and 2s of any of those? First, it's not just zero or where you're starting out to 300K. It's what is the path to getting there internally within my company? Is there a path to getting there internally? And it's okay sometimes if there's not, but you're probably going to have to identify, okay, once I get to this role, whether it's SMB or mid-market, that's when it might make sense to make a jump, the right type of jump, if that's going to support your goal of eventually getting to a 300K OTE. But a lot of people don't really think about that. They kind of just enter the role, try and do a good job, and they don't really start to think about how much time is it going to take, what's actually going to have to happen in order for me to get there. And then when they're not progressing or moving as fast towards their goal as they anticipated, they get frustrated and they burn out.
Yeah, 100%. I think a few things come to mind, and maybe pulling the thread of the analogy I was mentioning earlier. I think there's two major considerations: you at the individual level, and then you at the company level. Yeah. Starting with the individual, I think the fastest path to get there is generally promoting from SDR to SMB AE to mid-market AE to enterprise AE. Yeah. That's the fast track. Now, that being said, along the way, if you are at a fast-growing company and you do want to manage a team, I think becoming a manager of, at a minimum, an SMB account executive executive or mid-market account executive team especially is going to be another place where you can make that, and we'll break that down further. But it is very company dependent. So again, my mindset, I was an engineer for 3 years before I broke into tech sales. I saw some of my peers that had already made that transition, and I saw some of them in an individual contributor role as an account executive at different levels, starting to sniff 250, 300. So when I came into the career after leaving engineering, I was like locked in. That is all I wanted to do. Yes, I want to be a manager in the future. Yes, I want to run some teams, et cetera, et cetera. But until I get to that enterprise account executive level, I don't care. Now, as you get into your career, if you actually have results, if you actually crush quota, I was in a position where I had tons of leverage, and I kind of put pressure on my company to continue to promote me. Otherwise, to your point, I was going to go. But that, I think, is one thing I know we'll get into in terms of some of the reasons we see people that drop off. Maybe they get past that 2-year cliff, they get 4 years in, but they've been an SDR or an SMB account executive manager, or they're maybe doing sales enablement, and they've completely derailed their path and ability to get to that level. So that is a lot of what goes into the individual side. I think to your point, you need to be laser focused on where you want to go. And to that point also of the people, quite literally 50% probably drop off after a year or two, and they're right on the cusp of actually getting to another band. I see that as well. I'm sure we'll break that down further. But last thing, maybe on the company side as well, like I think if you're at a reputable market leading tech company, the ability to make that is always there. I think whereas maybe if you get into the right startup, a unicorn startup, those 500, 700K plus years are more common than maybe your established players. But I think that's honestly something that's also not talked about enough is, sure, you can be in a role that pays you 300K OTE, but if it's a startup with like 50 employees, no brand recognition, your likelihood of actually hitting that is like zero. So anyway, before I go too deep, I'll hand it back to you. But
no, that's a huge part of it. Like a lot of people think hitting a number like 300K OTE, it has entirely to do with your sales skills and your performance, and we'll get into that. Short on that, I think you should approach every role that I want to master it to the point where I could become a manager in this role. Like if you're an SMB AE, get to the point where you could be an SMB AE manager because you have your job down, you have your processes, your frameworks down. You're probably naturally coaching other people in your organization. They see that and they promote you. I think that's the natural path to get there. But so much of getting there has to do with picking the right company, picking the right organization. You can work at one company, but there's certain organizations that sell different product lines oftentimes. One's better than another that you want to put yourself in. Another piece I think is just doing the little things in your internal brand. Like if you're thought of highly by your management, and let's say you're performing well, it's not necessarily the top performers that are the ones they're always plucking out and promoting first. It's the ones that they can rely on, because secret managers do have favorites. They love the people who they can just rely on their team, who it's little internal things like, we need you guys to fill out this survey or just have this deliverable back to me by the end of the week. And they know I'm not going to need to remind this person. They're going to be the first ones to get it back to me, and I can just rely on them. If I'm out or if I'm busy and I need someone else is reaching out for help, I can just reach out and ping this person. They're going to get on Zoom and help them. It's those people. It's not necessarily the ride or die, like top performers who only care about their performance. So much of it has to do with picking the right organization, picking the right group within that organization, how you're thought of, as if you're thought of as a leader and a top performer within that organization, what your internal brand is. So much of that goes into whether you're going to hit those promotions you're going to need in order to get to that 300K OTE number. And last thing I'll say too is, you don't necessarily need a 300K OTE to make 300K. There are plenty of mid-market account executives who might have a 200 to 250K type OTE, but if the comp structure is fair and it's structured the right way and you're doing well, there are tons of mid-market AEs who crush that number. And there are some scenarios, I think, where it doesn't even make sense. If you're crushing it in a mid-market role, just stay there a lot of times. Like you don't necessarily have to promote to enterprise, because a lot of times your territory is not going to be as good to start out. They're going to make you work for it. You'll have a small, completely greenfield territory, and it's like you don't even need to get to enterprise to make 300K at a lot of organizations. So a lot of this is just being at the right place in the right time and being at the right organization where maybe you're not maximizing your upside at every single position. You could always go externally and get a little pay bump, but if the pathway is there and it's proven and other people have been in your shoes before, that's where I usually tell people to focus long term.
Yeah, and I know, the premise of this is why people do not reach that. So I think we've done a good job kind of laying out some of the intangibles. Obviously, comment below on this video too if you want us. We watch these comments directly, so we're happy to kind of help you with your situation. But now kind of transitioning, like that is the roadmap. And to your point, the theory is simple. The execution over 5+ years is difficult.
Yes.
So I would love to probe into some of the things you've seen, whether it's your peers. Obviously, we'll stay anonymous, not give any names or anything. But what are some of the reasons, maybe if they leave the career entirely or they just get derailed along the way? What are some of the biggest things you should look out for if that's your goal?
There's two I'll touch on that I see the most. One, jumping ship too early. If you're at a good organization with a proven track record, there's always, especially if you're at a mid-market or larger organization, there'll always be smaller companies that dangle a little pay bump in front of you. And I just saw it a lot where people would do 1 year as an SDR at a large enterprise company and take the 10K base salary bump to go be an SMB AE at some smaller company, but then they just get stuck there. And 3 years later, they're still in that same SMB AE role, where if they had just stayed at their first company, they likely would have promoted 3 times in that same time frame and been making much more, even though they were taking a little pay cut in the beginning. So that's one, is jumping ship too early when you're at a great organization. Number 2 is reps that find themselves in tough territories or where they think the deck is stacked against them, which happens where they enter a territory it's hard to perform well. They don't think they're set up for success. And within a month or two, they just give up and sort of burn out and start to coast out of frustration, when a lot of times management, they understand that. They're looking at it and they're like, if I had someone else in this territory, would the result be different? And if the answer is no, you're not going to get penalized for that in most cases. And I've seen it so many times, and I've had this happen to me where I had a really bad territory when I first entered as an account executive. For 6 months, I still did the right things every single day. And they end up rewarding you. Like, territories get moved around. Things are constantly changing within sales organizations. So even if things aren't going well, if you're still putting in the work every single day and you have a good brand, 90% of companies and organizations are smart enough to eventually take care of you, and then they'll put you in the best situation and you'll actually just end up doing better long-term because of it. But I see so many reps, things aren't going their way a month or two, they burn out, they get lazy, they start just coasting, and then they completely stall within their organization.
Yeah, 100%. And especially at, I would say, the first 2 to 3 years of your career, when you go from SDR to account executive, percentage-wise, that's probably the biggest jump in pay you're ever going to have. If you're going from like an 80K job to like a 150K OTE, there's something really funny that happens, I see, with people who don't on paper have 100K OTE. When they are sitting at 90K a year, they're hitting like 120% of their number as an SDR, and likely by the end of year 1, they're going to sniff 100K plus. But someone comes in and offers them 120, and to your point, it's a questionable company and or it restarts the clock as an SDR. You've basically just added another year guaranteed to your promotion cycle. And I think people oftentimes make a short-sighted decision. They have one bad month and they're like, well, you know, I gave it all I could. And it's like you literally just had one bad month, and or you just saw someone get promoted ahead of you who was just a bit ahead of you. I mean, there's so many scenarios we could break down there. I don't think it's inside the scope of this episode, but my point being is it's really difficult, and where I would say the vast majority get sidetracked is, to your point, making that jump early and or making rash decisions when you're taking maybe 6 to 18 months worth of data in the scope of what is ideally going to be a 10+ year career where you make 300K plus every single year.
Yep.
And you over emotionally react to the possibilities and also the negatives that seem so extreme that instead, when you get 4, 5, 6 years into this career, it's just kind of like, all right, part of the job, whatever. And so that's definitely the biggest one, I would say, by far, that derails people. I also want to touch, especially if you're like entry level, trying to get to that 300K mark and you're an SDR right now, or even SMBAE, one of the things that you undoubtedly will happen, and I know you have a contrasting opinion on this, so I'd love to pick your brain, but I think the SDR management position and or sales enablement is the biggest death trap for 90% of people who take that, in terms of preventing them or very drastically prolonging their ability to get to a 300K plus a year role. And what I mean, this is going to happen if you're absolutely crushing it as an SDR. This happened to me at my company. Thankfully, I'd been in tech as an engineer. I had seen a similar thing happen in tech companies where if people come out to a really hot start, they're like, hey, you'd be a great manager. You'd be awesome to head up this new team.
Yeah.
We're going to take over the West and like, we don't have a team that's doing this right now. You'd be the perfect fit. And they're going to spice you up. They're going to make you feel amazing. Even if it's an internal move and an internal promotion, they're going to be like, you're an SDR making $85K a year right now. We'll make you an SDR manager for $135.
Yeah.
Like, how's that sound? And 75% of it is base salary versus commission, like all of these different things. And again, I'm not hating on that position, but strictly with the lens of, if you're getting into tech sales with the goal of becoming a 300K plus a year rep or manager, in my opinion, in most companies, being an SDR manager is only going to prolong that process by a minimum of 18 months, if not 2 years plus. And the last thing I'd say is also similar thing of like, hey, you're a great SDR. Maybe you're at a massive organization that has 1,000 SDRs. They're like, we need someone to head up our sales enablement for sales development representatives. Like, you'd be perfect. Do that for a year. We can easily transition you to manager from there. Bullshit. Because all the people saying that are not the actual sales managers or directors that would be hiring you from that role. And while all these enablement people or all these people from a different team are telling you, dude, do this for a year, set it up, and then you can go anywhere you want. That's not the person that's actually going to be hiring you when you have 1 year of SDR experience and then 1 year of non-direct customer-facing sales experience in sales enablement. And I've seen several people on both of those paths get there. And to your point, 2 to 3 years later, it's like, what do I do next?
Yeah.
So
I don't disagree with you at all. I think in most cases, if that's your goal to get to 300K OTE, you don't want to take one of those BD team leads that they dangle in front of you. You'll get a higher base. The one I took, I worked at an organization where there was a very proven track record of SDR, BDR managers then being promoted into roles where you could earn 300K OTE. And as a general rule of thumb, if you work for a large corporation, that's typically more of an acceptable path where you can still move into like a high OTE closing role. I think if you work at a mid-market, smaller organization, the BD team lead is a very risky proposition. And particularly before I ever took that job, I did 2 years as an AE. So I had the closing sales experience. I built a good brand in that SDR manager role and was able to move into enterprise as an account executive. And that path was a proven path that I'd seen many people follow at my previous organization. But you're totally right. Do not take one of those do not take one of those BD team leads straight after being an SDR. You just get trapped. You need to get that full sales cycle closing experience on your resume, or in just about every case, you're really going to stall your career. And on that note, I know before we even started recording, you were talking about how you see a lot of people get over that first line of SDR to maybe SMB or mid-market account executive, but then they just stall out there and they don't eventually make it over the finish line to where they would need to get to make that magical 300K OTE number. What are some of those areas you commonly see people stalling or burning out, things like that?
Yeah, I think especially with people young in their career, I would say 2 major things come to mind. One, if you got into this track early and this is your first ever career, I don't want to get like too meta here. This is going to get a little foo-foo even for my liking. But I do see people that get into a sales career, they go all in, they make a ton of progress, which is great. And then without realizing it, like their entire identity is just being a workaholic and being like, I'm busting my balls in sales. I'm getting, 200K OTE by the time I'm 26. And you've kind of made that your entire identity and don't really know, that's a great motivator. But when you get there, I would say, especially in like the second year where you've eclipsed that 200K-ish range, whether it's, 180 or 220, somewhere in there, it's great. I don't think most people take it for granted, generally speaking. But it's never as fulfilling as it was the first time you reached that cliff. Yeah. So it's like, let's say you've had a good run. You went from SDR to SMBAE. You're in that 130 to 160 range maybe as an SMBAE. You get that next promotion. Maybe you're 3 years into your career at this point to mid-market AE, and you're now 190 to 210 OTE. That's amazing. And this is where for the next probably 2 to 3 years, you're not really going to have a chance to go enterprise. And even though things are good, even though you're working your ass off, you're making great money, it's just that second year you're at that band, that second year where, now it's kind of become normal. It's just not as much of a dopamine hit and like self-reinforcing thing. And I just see a lot of people that maybe they just can't recognize it for what it is and start to build healthy habits outside of work. But that is probably the biggest one I see, especially for those that are breaking in their early 20s, maybe right out of school, or if they didn't go to college or something of that nature, and then have a good run. Yeah. On top of that, it's, now let's look at how you actually be sustainable, because I think, again, this is very challenging, demanding work, and I love it. But at the same time, we're not curing cancer, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not necessarily like a mission driven role where, again, I very much like what I do. I very much like tech. I very much like being a part of, like, I completely have transformed and been a massive part of e-commerce companies that had their biggest year ever. And there's some very cool win stories that I've been able to do as well. So don't get me wrong. But at the same time, it's like, I think the biggest thing that has helped me is once I've gotten to these consistent earning bands and gotten higher and higher, I put a strong emphasis on having something completely outside of work that I can just dive into that has nothing to do with tech, nothing to do with sales, and all of those different things.
Yeah.
And whether it's exercise, whether it's communities, clubs, I'm a coach of a team as well. Those are things that I can dive 100% into. And again, I'm a former athlete, so if I work with younger athletes or athletes that are transitioning into a new sport for the first time, that is something that's very fulfilling to me. And I can help people make that progress. And again, completely outside of the tech sales world. But there's many examples I could give. I'll pause there. I've got a lot of thoughts, but I'm curious what you've seen, if that resonates with you. And I guess from your perspective, coming up, you're starting to get towards a decade in the role now as well. What are things you do to stay sane and not just get completely burnt out by all of this?
So I totally agree with everything you said. I think sustainability is key. You have to find things that just take you away from screens after work. For me, it's simple. Like I play pickleball, volleyball, basketball, run, exercising, things like that. I'll take the other side though. So that is totally a reason why people burn out. And everything you just said is like, people need to take that into account. Like, you don't want this to become your entire life and your identity, and whether you win or close a certain deal or hit your number, your entire self-worth is based on that.
Yeah.
On the flip side though, while you do have to balance that, I see a lot of people who burn out because they get into tech sales with the wrong impression and for the wrong reasons. I see a lot of people getting in and they're like, they think it's like a laptop job. They're like, I want to work on my own hours and flexibility. And look, a lot of those remote SDR jobs, you're making pretty good money. You're working remote. It is more or less, you got to show up and be online on time. But a lot of people push the limits, and you can have a pretty cushy, flexible job. But what I've found is once you get into that account executive role, if you want to crush it and do well, you do have to be willing at times and weeks to work 50, 60 hours, do things on weekends, put yourself ahead for the week, take a little time on Sunday to set yourself up for the next day, be willing to wake up early and work late and do what it takes to crush it in that role and eventually move on to the next role. And that blindsides a lot of people because, one, they realize 95 to 99% of tech sales jobs are 9-to-5s. Like, you have to be online. If you're running deal cycles, you have other internal stakeholders involved. You have solutions engineers you're working with, other people. There's these deal Slack channels that blow up. You can't just not be online. It's like, I'll get to that at 9 p.m. No, you won't. You're going to be like, you got to be online now, like while everyone else is online. So it's not this big, flexible, fly around the world and work wherever you want job. So I just want to eliminate that impression just in case anyone had that. But it's a balance because, to your point, it can't become your whole identity, but you do have to be willing to wake up early some days, work late, take care of things on weekends. And for a lot of people, they just like that idea of a 9-to-5 consulting type job, for example, where they're just given work to do. If they complete it, their task is done and they get a pat on the back. Where sales, it's not like that. There's no playbook for you to follow where you can just finish your work and be done. You have to be willing to get scrappy at times and have the mentality that you're going to do what it takes.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And I think equally important, opposite side of that spectrum as well. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with is, one, I would say upfront, like me and you both, like I know we've talked about this a lot offline, like we'll run through a wall. We're the kind of person that will just brute force our way to something and get it done. I think that is almost a prerequisite for, again, if you want to really stand out and actually have the chance to make that within 5 or so years, you kind of have to have that mentality. I think especially years 1 through 3 in particular. And it's not like once you get there, you can take your foot off the gas. Yeah. But if you don't put that work in up front, you don't really have an ability to systematize your work and also recognize signal versus noise. Very simple example. It's like, we've even seen this on our channel, but it's like, it's really tempting to feel like, I want to make 100 calls a day. I want to make 100 emails a day. And that may have made you successful for the first 6 to 12 months. I know we even talk about this channel. Like, it's really tempting. Like, man, I wish I could post like 3, 4, 5 videos a week that would totally boost engagement, all of these different things. And then the flip side is, as you get into these higher leverage positions like account executive, it's no longer setting 10 meetings a month. It's a dollar-based quota. Yeah. And so if you find the right deal, you find like an $800 to $1 million type of deal, that completely makes or breaks your year. And obviously there's way more that goes into it. The message here is not source, all the big deals. Like you got to close small deals. But as an example, like one of the things I find is people don't put in the time up front. They don't systematize their work, and they're putting as much time and energy into a $20,000 deal as they are to a $500,000 deal.
Yep.
When in reality, if they had put in frameworks, if they had put in systems in place to kind of really for all these smaller, more transactional types of deals, just move that along kind of quietly in the background, then you're really optimizing your time and leverage to the most important things. And that's something I think people really, really struggle with is they get swamped with all this work. They're used to brute forcing it. And then they don't even ask themselves, why am I working this hard on a $10,000 deal? Like, quite frankly, this prospect, after a point, they either want it or they don't.
Yeah.
And if they don't, good, because I have a $450,000 deal that I'd rather spend 3 calls a week on instead of this $10,000 deal.
Yeah.
So one of many symptoms. Curious if anything
No,
resonates.
I think that's really well said. It's a really good point. You have to go through that time period, roughly the first 1 to 3 years where you are just grinding, brute forcing your way. And it's not that you stop working hard. It's just by naturally doing that, you start to recognize patterns and you put systems and frameworks in place that work for you and your organization. And you're just able to leverage your time better and focus your time on higher value activities once you get beyond year 3 or so. That's not a hard number, but it's not that you stop working hard, but a lot of people aren't willing to go through that time period where they just grind their teeth to get to that point to where they can systematize and almost gamify parts of the job where it just they put in certain inputs, they know what they're likely going to get out of it, and they can identify better areas to spend their time.
Yeah, I mean, tons of things we could continue to break down. Maybe that's good for a part 1, and definitely if anyone's watching, like, feel free to comment. If you have questions and or want us to do a part 2, we're happy to do so. And just to note as well, like all this systematizing that we're talking about, it's why we literally built higherlevels.com. We have different programs where we help reps not only do just the day-to-day manual work better, but also put scalable systems in place where they're improving not just scale, but quantity and quality at the same time. So many different things in there, whether it's the SDR role, account executive, different skills of cold calling, emailing, etc. Connor's also a live coach, but hopefully I didn't plug so much there that it was off-putting. And anything else before we go?
I think that's a wrap. Thanks for having me back on.